I still hear the slam of the door sometimes, the soft, almost polite click of the lock after. Not anger. Worse. The kind of silence that tells you the person who loved you doesn't anymore, and maybe never will again. I stared at the door, frozen, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape first. Maybe if I ran after him, said the right thing, begged the right way. But even then, some part of me knew. He was already gone. The chair scraped against the floor when I'd tried to move, the sharp screech slicing through the stillness. I wanted to shout, to call him childish, dramatic, unfair. But the words tasted like ash, maybe because I'd said them too many times before. A memory flickered, cruel and fast. Him laughing softly at one of my bad jokes, slipping his hand into mine without asking. I used to be his safe place. Now I was the reason he needed one. I leaned my forehead against the door, whispering into the wood like it could somehow hold him there. I didn't mean to lose you. But the house, heavy with everything we never said, just swallowed my voice whole. Brielle's texts kept buzzing like little electric shocks on my nightstand. Girl, you need this. One night. Let loose. You deserve it. You're not dead just because you're married. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button, then locked it without answering. Aaron was in the next room, the low hum of the TV spilling through the hallway. He hated parties like that. The drinking, the cheap costumes, the fake flirting disguised as just fun. He never forbade me. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Sometimes all it took was a glance across the dinner table, that almost invisible tightening around his mouth, the way his hand would still halfway to his glass. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. And somehow, it always made me feel smaller than shouting ever could. Still, somewhere under the guilt, something darker twisted. An ember of resentment I hadn't wanted to name. You're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to be seen. You're not a possession. I scrolled through old photos Brielle sent, costumes that looked more lingerie than Halloween. She looked alive. Untouchable. I used to be that once. The next evening, I pulled out the black corset, the skirt that barely deserved the name, held them up to the mirror, half expecting to laugh at myself. But something in the reflection caught me off guard. A hunger in my own eyes. Not for attention, for something else. For proof that I still mattered. You going out? Aaron's voice floated from the living room, casual, like he already knew the answer. Yeah, I called back, heart thudding hard against my ribs. Just a little thing with Brielle. I'll be back later. He didn't press, didn't even glance up from his phone. Just a nod, dismissive, like he was already miles away. I stood there for a moment, jacket in hand, waiting for what exactly? Permission? A reason to stay? Nothing came. Maybe if he'd asked where. Maybe if he'd stood up, crossed the room, looked at me the way he used to. Maybe then I'd have peeled off the corset, slipped into a hoodie, stayed home curled up against him on the couch. But he stayed rooted to the chair, thumb flicking mindlessly across his screen, not seeing me at all. And I hated the bitter taste rising in my throat, because deep down I knew. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he was tired of asking to be chosen. I could have changed. I could have thrown the stupid costume into the closet, curled up next to him, closed the widening gap between us before it swallowed everything. I could have chosen him, but instead, I chose silence. I chose the door. The lock clicked softly behind me as I stepped out into the night. And even then, some part of me knew. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was walking out on something I might never get back. Brielle's car blared bass-heavy music before I even stepped off the curb. She leaned over the passenger seat, waving her phone like a trophy. You look hot, Jess. Get in before you overthink it. I hesitated for a second, the porch light behind me flickering like some warning signal. But I climbed in anyway. Before the door even closed, Brielle was tugging at the edges of my jacket, laughing. "Girl, what's the point of looking like that if you're gonna cover it up?" I pulled it tighter instinctively. "It's freezing," I lied. She shot me a look, part teasing, part annoyed. "You're not gonna freeze. You're gonna own it, for once." The music swallowed any more arguments. I pressed myself against the seat, trying to disappear into the leather as we sped off into the neon-streaked night. The house pulsed before we even reached the door, lights flashing from the windows, bass thudding deep in the ground like a second heartbeat. Inside, it was a carnival of chaos. Bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, hands waving red cups in the air, masks slipping, costumes half falling apart. Brielle disappeared almost instantly into the crowd, her laughter trailing behind like perfume. I stood there, jacket gripped tight around me, heart hammering against my ribs. It was too loud, too bright, too much. A guy in a fake vampire cape stumbled past, sloshing beer dangerously close to my shoes. Another one brushed my arm, a little too deliberately, his eyes flicking down and lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. I edged back against the wall, clutching the fabric at my chest. I'm not doing anything wrong. That thought became my shield. Over and over, a whispered prayer against the gnawing guilt rising in my throat. I didn't dance. I didn't flirt. I didn't laugh the way Brielle did, tossing her hair back, grabbing strangers' hands for shots. I just stood there, smiling too tightly, laughing too hollowly, feeling everyone's eyes scrape across my skin like nails against glass. Not my fault if they stare. Brielle found me eventually, grabbing my hand and spinning me toward the center of the living room. "You're a statue!" she shouted over the music, yanking the jacket open again. "You look insane in this outfit. Own it." I shook my head, trying to pull away. "I'm good. Seriously." But she only laughed louder, looping her arm around my neck, dragging me into a sloppy circle of costumed strangers. Someone pointed at me. Another one whistled. I felt my face burn under the strobes, a sick rush of adrenaline and shame knotting in my stomach. Brielle lifted her phone high, catching a video. Me trying to laugh, trying to blend, while hands in the background pointed, whispered, stared. I didn't even notice. Not really. Not then. I smiled for the camera. Because that's what you're supposed to do when someone shouts your name and says you look beautiful. Smile. Pretend. Pretend you don't feel hollow. The clock slid past 2 before I realized I hadn't seen Brielle in over an hour. Or maybe longer. I glanced around the packed living room, faces blurring into each other under the flashing lights. Strangers. Laughing, shouting, grinding into one another like it mattered. Like any of it would matter tomorrow. Brielle was gone. And the truth was, I hadn't even noticed when she left. I pushed through the crowd, my body moving on instinct, slipping between people like a ghost no one even saw, no hands pulling me back, no voices calling my name. Outside, the cold slammed into me like a wall. I sucked in a shaky breath. It tasted better than the stifling air inside, sharp and clean, laced with something bitter. I tugged my jacket tighter around my chest and stumbled toward the street, heels clicking awkwardly on the cracked sidewalk. For a second, I thought about going back inside, finding Brielle, pretending the night wasn't what it already was, a mistake. Another in a long, shameful line. But my feet kept moving. The ride home blurred into a smear of empty streets and half-dead streetlights, flickering against the window like melting stars. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, heart sinking deeper with every mile. What was I even expecting to find when I got home? A fight? An apology waiting on the tip of Aaron's tongue? Or maybe nothing at all. I didn't know which scared me more. The front door creaked open under my hand. I slipped inside, blinking into the dark. Silence, thick, heavy, final. No TV buzzing in the living room. No soft murmur of Aaron on the phone. The way he sometimes stayed up late talking to his brother about work or sports or things I pretended not to care about. No coffee scent curling through the air. Just silence. I toed off my heels at the door, each movement loud and clumsy against the stillness. The raw ache in my feet throbbed in time with the panic beginning to pulse in my chest. The living room was dark. The kitchen, too. Even the little hallway light, the one Aaron always left on for me, was off. Something in me curled inward. I crept forward, each step against the old hardwood floor sounding like a scream. The kind of sound you can't take back once it's out. Aaron? My voice cracked the air, weak and unsure. Nothing. Only the faint groan of the house settling. Or maybe it was just my imagination. I moved to the bedroom, hand trembling as it closed around the doorknob. Pushed it open. Empty. The bed was untouched. The air inside the room stale and still. I stood there, jacket clutched around me, staring at the hollow space where he should have been, where he always was. Tonight, like a quiet verdict handed down without trial. He wasn't. The realization didn't hit all at once. It sank in slow, cruel waves, each one pulling a little more air from my lungs. Maybe it wasn't just tonight I lost him. Maybe I'd been losing him for months, years even. And maybe the real difference between us was that he didn't need a costume to hide it. He just faded quietly, the way people do when they realize they're no longer seen. I dropped my jacket to the floor and crossed the room on shaking legs, ran my hand over the bedspread, cold and smooth beneath my fingertips. I whispered into the empty space, half hoping, half praying, "Please be here." No answer. The panic threatened to crawl up my throat, but another feeling wrestled it back. Something heavier. Guilt. The kind you can't outrun. The kind that sits with you in the dark, long after everyone else has gone home. I pressed my palm flat against the mattress, willing it to give me some sign he was coming back. Some warmth. Some hint. Nothing. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness until it blurred into shapes. Maybe I thought if I sat still enough, if I stayed quiet enough, I could rewind time, erase the party, the outfit, the months of small betrayals I convinced myself didn't count. But there was no rewind button. Only this. This cold, hollow house and the crushing silence he'd left behind. And for the first time I realized I wasn't alone because he left. I was alone because long before tonight, I stopped giving him a reason to stay. He sat at the kitchen table like he was waiting for something, scrolling through his phone with slow, measured flicks of his thumb. The light above him buzzed faintly, throwing long shadows across the room. He didn't look up when I stepped inside, didn't move. For a second, I thought maybe he hadn't even noticed me. Maybe if I tiptoed past, we could pretend nothing happened. "Why are you up so late?" My voice came out too bright, too brittle. It cracked between us like cheap glass. He didn't answer right away, just slid his gaze up, slow and deliberate. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was something colder, something final. "How was the party?" 4 words, soft, even, but every syllable pressed down like a weight I couldn't hold. "Fine," I said, forcing a shrug, forcing a smile. "Just dancing, nothing crazy." His lips curved slightly. Not in amusement, not even in disgust. In something worse, pity. He tapped his screen, turned the phone toward me. There I was, frozen in an endless loop, laughing too loudly, spinning under flashing lights, corset slipping, strangers' eyes raking over every exposed inch of skin. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I could still feel their stares on my body, ghost-like, crawling across my skin. "That's not what it looks like." The lie spilled out before I could stop it, pathetic and small. He smiled again, but not the smile I knew, the soft, tired one he used to wear when I said something ridiculous. This one barely touched his eyes. It's exactly what it looks like, Jess. No heat, no venom, just a quiet resignation that made my insides collapse. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. I wasn't standing in the kitchen anymore. I was standing on the crumbling edge of something massive, something irreversible, and I could feel it giving way under my feet. He set the phone down with a soft click against the wood. "You know," he said, voice low, almost conversational. I used to wonder when it would happen. My stomach lurched. When what would happen? He leaned back in the chair, studying me like I was some puzzle he had finally solved. When you'd stop pretending. The silence between us grew thick, almost suffocating. I didn't do anything, I said, the words scraping my throat raw. I didn't cheat. I didn't even dance with anyone. I was just... He held up a hand, not to silence me, to stop himself from caring too much. You knew, he said simply, when you left the house. That's why you didn't let me see you. That's why you lied without lying. I gripped the back of a chair so tightly my knuckles whitened. You're blowing this out of proportion, I choked. It was a party, Aaron, a costume. He gave a small laugh, hollow, tired. No, Jess. It was a choice. The light above us flickered again, a nervous pulse in the ceiling. You chose to be seen by everyone but me. The words sliced so cleanly that for a second I almost admired the precision. I shook my head, desperate, angry. You could have asked me to stay. You could have said something. He just looked at me. I stopped asking a long time ago. The weight of that sentence knocked the air from my lungs. I stumbled forward, hands trembling. I'm sorry, I whispered. I didn't mean... You didn't mean to get caught, he corrected softly. There's a difference. I flinched, because he was right, and we both knew it. He pushed back his chair, standing slowly, deliberate, unrushed. I'm tired, Jess. His voice broke slightly on my name, the first crack in all that terrible calm. I'm tired of hoping you'll come home to me instead of everyone else. I reached for him, blindly. Please, don't do this. I can fix it. We can fix it. He stepped back, just out of reach. You can't fix something you don't think is broken. The chair rocked slightly where he'd left it, the only sound in the whole house. I don't hate you, he said quietly, almost tenderly. I just finally realized loving you isn't enough to save you from yourself. I watched him walk past me, grab his keys from the counter, pull on his jacket. He paused at the door, hand on the knob, back still to me. I hope someday you figure out what you're really looking for. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it, the full, aching certainty that this wasn't a fight. There would be no angry calls, no desperate apologies, no slow makeup. This was a farewell, a silent one. I didn't chase him. I didn't scream. I just stood there, heart shattering inside a body that still looked whole. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I realized you can lose someone long before they walk away. You just don't feel it until the silence fills the space where they used to be. The air between us crackled, not with anger, but with something colder, something irreversible. You think this was the first time? His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't even angry. It was almost tender. And somehow, that hurt worse than if he had screamed. My mouth opened, but the words tangled in my throat, a messy knot of panic and guilt. I didn't... The sentence withered halfway out. He shook his head slowly, as if he already knew. As if he'd heard every excuse before I even had the chance to speak them aloud. I gave you so many chances, he said, voice low, even. So many nights pretending not to notice when you came home later than you said. So many mornings convincing myself the way you looked through me wasn't what it felt like. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't trying to wound. He was just stating facts, cold and clean. Each word settled into the room like dust you couldn't sweep away. "I wanted to believe you were still fighting for us," he said, his eyes not moving from mine. I needed to believe it. I took a step forward, reaching without thinking. But he moved first. He turned toward the side drawer, the one near the fridge we never used for anything but junk mail and lost receipts. Pulled it open. The sound of paper sliding free was too loud in the stillness. A manila folder. Thin. Ordinary. I stared at it like it was a gun he had quietly laid between us. He set it on the table, tapping the cover once with his fingers, then looking up at me. Not daring me. Not baiting me. Just offering the truth I had spent months avoiding. "Divorce papers," he said simply. "Filled out. Ready. Weeks ago." The floor shifted under me. My knees buckled before I even realized they were giving way. I caught the edge of the counter, fingers scrabbling for purchase. For a second, neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. I wanted to ask how long he had been planning this. Wanted to scream that he should have told me, that he should have fought harder. But deep down, I already knew the answer. He had been fighting. I just hadn't seen it. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. "I was waiting," he said, softer now. "Waiting for the moment you'd make it impossible to lie to myself anymore." I sank into the nearest chair, jacket still clutched tight around me like it could somehow shield me from this. He stayed standing, arms loose at his sides, like even he wasn't sure what to do now that the truth was out in the open. "I didn't cheat," I whispered. "I swear, Aaron, I didn't." He closed his eyes briefly, like he was tired. So tired. This was never just about cheating. The words stung more because they were so calm. "You stopped seeing me, Jess," he said, "long before tonight." I gripped the chair tighter, nails biting into the wood. "I never meant to hurt you," I said, but the words sounded childish even to my own ears. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was memorizing the way I looked at this exact moment. "I know," he said, "but you did anyway." There was no anger in his voice, no heat, only resignation, only the echo of every quiet moment I had missed, every small withdrawal, every silent hurt I had brushed aside. "Was it Brielle?" I asked suddenly, the bitterness rising before I could stop it. "Was it because she made me go?" He smiled faintly, not mocking, not cruel. "Jess," he said gently, "Brielle didn't make you choose yourself over us." I blinked, the tears stinging harder now. Stinging because he was right. He slid the folder a little closer to me across the table. No pressure, no demands, just an invitation to finally see what I had done. "I'm not serving you with them," he said, surprising me. I looked up, hope sparking, stupid and desperate. "Not yet," he added. "I wanted you to know they were ready." Another blow, sharper, colder. "I needed you to understand," he said, softer now, "that I was done fighting alone." The room swam slightly. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. "You're giving up," I said, but it came out more accusation than question. He didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "I gave everything I had. You gave it away without even noticing." A long silence stretched between us, thicker than grief, heavier than regret. "Where will you go?" I asked finally, voice shaking. He shrugged slightly. "I don't know. Somewhere I can start remembering who I am when I'm not begging to be enough." He turned then, grabbing his keys, the door already half open in his mind. "I'll stay with a friend tonight," he said without looking back. "You can have the space you wanted." And then, quieter, like a closing prayer, "I hope someday you figure out what you were really looking for." The door clicked shut behind him, soft and final. And I sat there at the kitchen table, the divorce papers staring up at me, realizing that sometimes the cruelest punishment isn't being left, it's knowing you deserved to be. I sat on the couch, the house yawning empty around me, scrolling through old photos I could barely see. The buzz of my phone made me jump. Unknown number. For a second, stupidly, I hoped it was him. An apology. A crack in the wall. I swiped it open. You lost him the moment you stopped seeing him. Now he's seeing someone who does. L. I blinked, read it again. The words didn't stab. They sank, slow, heavy. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to offer a name I recognized, a chance to explain it away. Nothing. No threats, no accusations. Just truth, plain and bare. I whispered into the quiet. Who are you? No answer. Of course not. Maybe an old friend. Maybe not. It didn't matter. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew. Aaron hadn't left because of a costume. He left because long before tonight, I stopped choosing him. And finally, he chose someone else. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing I'd been losing him for a long time and pretending not to notice. I curled up on the couch, blanket around my shoulders like armor against a war I had already lost. Every time he tried to tell me how he felt, every time he sat quietly, waiting for me to look up from my phone, my own world, every time I laughed too loud at another man's joke and told myself it didn't mean anything, it all stacked up. Invisible bricks between us, until he was on one side and I was on the other. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to block out the memory of his voice. Too calm, too steady. You stopped seeing me, Jess. I whispered into the emptiness. I didn't mean to. But even the walls didn't bother answering anymore. Validation, attention. They filled the silence he used to fill. I told myself it was harmless, that needing a few compliments wasn't betrayal. But maybe betrayal isn't always a kiss, or a lie, or a night away. Maybe sometimes it's forgetting to reach back when someone's hand is stretched out to you. You didn't even notice, I imagined him saying, voice rough with the weight of months. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, breath hitching. Little by little, I had carved him out of my life, carved until nothing of him fit anymore, and he just finally had the courage to walk through the hole I made. It's been months. The house feels bigger now, too big, too hollow. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself whispering into the empty rooms like he might answer. Are you happy? No response, of course. Just the wind pressing cold against the glass. I imagine him somewhere else, laughing quietly with someone new. Someone who sees him the way I used to. Does she listen? I ask the night. I press my forehead to the cold window pane, breath fogging the glass. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks of me at all, if there's even a sliver of space in his new life where I still exist. But most nights, I know better. The real betrayal wasn't a party, wasn't the costume. It was every quiet moment I chose something else over him. He just finally chose himself. I trace a finger through the fog on the glass, writing a word I can't bring myself to say aloud. Gone. And this time, there's no costume I can wear to hide from that.